Hi there, today I'm going to be showing you how to set up your Marketo integration within Clearbit so that you can enrich your leads with person and company level information so that you can supercharge your lead scoring mechanism. So the first thing we need to do is create a Clearbit API user within Marketo. So we are going to navigate to admin section and then go to user and roles, and then we're going to go invite new user. Here you can just put in anything. It doesn't really matter because the email addresses do not matter for API users. So you can just put in your company domain as an example. You can just put in Clearbit integration. You can put in an optional reason here, used for enriching Marketo leads with Clearbit information, and leave access expires as never. Then go next. Select an API user, and if you do not already have an API role within your Marketo instance, then you can follow this guide here, which will show you how to create an API only user within Marketo. And I'll put a link to this blog post in the description of the YouTube video, so you can come here to find this link. So then we go back to Marketo, we select our API role, we check the API only checkbox, and then we go next. And since this is an API only user, an invitation is not required. So then we just hit send. Okay, once we have our API user set up for Clearbit, we then need to create a launch point service for this Clearbit user. In order to do that, we are going to go to the launch point section in admin. And then we are going to create a new service. So I'm going to call this Clearbit test. And we're going to select the custom option here. Description, we can just say used for enriching leads with Clearbit information. And the API only user we're going to use is the user that we created in the previous step, which in this case is the Clearbit at theworkflowpro.com. And then we go create. And then to get the client ID and the client secret credentials, which we will need later on in the Clearbit platform, we click the view details option here. So we're going to copy the client ID and the client secret, and we'll use these later on in Clearbit. And it's worth noting here that you should keep these client IDs and secrets close to your heart, because if anyone has access to these, then they can gain API access to your Marketo instance. They can then gain API access to your Marketo instance, which could be very dangerous. And I'll delete this user and this launch point service as soon as I'm finished this video. So that's how I'm keeping my Marketo instance safe. And then we go close. And then the next step is we're going to go to the Clearbit enrichment platform to set up the Marketo connection. Okay, now that we have our launch point service for Clearbit, we are going to go to the Clearbit platform, to the enrichment section. We're going to click configure on the Marketo tile. Then we're going to copy in our client ID and our client secret. And then to get the endpoint URL, we are going to go to the web services section. So close this, go to web services. We're going to scroll down to the REST API section, and we are going to copy the endpoint URL. And then we are going to click Connect Marketo. Okay, now that we have Marketo connected within Clearbit, the very first thing we are going to do is create our field mappings. So in here, we have 4 different Clearbit entities that we can use to map to Marketo fields. So we've got Clearbit attributes, which can come from the company that the person works for, or they can be person level information too. So in this case, we are going to map the person employment title to the Marketo job title field. I'll explain the override preferences in a second. Then we're going to add another field mapping here. So we can see for page view on the person, we've got different values like their week over week engagement, monthly page view total, and the last time they viewed a page. So we can select this and map it to another Marketo field. So let's just say like some sort of lead score. Let's just say, just map this to some lead score. We're going to add another field mapping here. This time we're going to use a system trait, and we're going to use the Clearbit ready value, and it indicates that Clearbit has finished its initial sync, useful as a workflow trigger. So if you mouse over any of these values, it'll give you a description about the field, and you can click the learn more icon to learn more. And that's the same with all of these. So if we go to company name, we can see that it's just the company's name. Or if we go to person, person given name is the person's first name. So you can mouse over any of these values to get a description. So let's go back to the system traits. Let's go to Clearbit ready and map that to the Clearbit ready field. And then the final thing we need to look at are the custom traits we have on the person. So this is populated with Clearbit reveal information, as well as your own custom fields that exist within your Marketo instance. So in this case, we are just going to select, let's say, company metrics, employees range, and then let's select a corresponding field within Marketo. And then all we have to do is hit save to save these mappings. And I'll explain what these override preferences mean in a second before we hit save. So as I explain in this blog post here, if we go down to the mapping Clearbit attributes to Marketo field section, we will notice that the conditionally overwrite preference will only overwrite the Marketo field if the field is blank, contains unknown, or the last value in this field was populated by Clearbit. So it will not overwrite the field if the value was updated by Marketo or the CRM that you have mapped to your Marketo instance. And then the second option is always overwrite, which is pretty straightforward. And then you'll notice here that with Boolean fields, you will only have the always overwrite option because they don't have a null or blank value. So that's why if we go back to Clearbit here, the Clearbit ready field in Marketo is a Boolean field. So that's why it's set to always overwrite by default. And if you want to change any of these, you just click the drop down and select the overwrite preference that you want. The final thing we are going to cover in the field mapping section is adding a group. So the reason a grouping is useful, as I explain in the blog post here, is that Clearbit will only populate the fields within a group if it has values for all of the mapped attributes. And if it doesn't have values for all of the mapped attributes, then none of the fields will be populated. So a good example of where you might want to use this is for a company's address. So for example, you could create a group for the company's street, state, postal code, and country, so that Clearbit will only populate all of these fields if it has a value for all of these attributes, or else it won't populate any of them, because there's no point having a postal code populated if there's no street, or there's no point having a state populated if there's no country. So this is a good example of where you might want to create a group. And then the same as before, you just search for the field you're interested in. So company state, map it to the corresponding Marketo field. And then we can do country, map it to the corresponding Marketo field. And then we can change the conditionally overwrite to be always overwrite as well. And this has the exact same definition as I explained earlier on. So now once we hit save, we can go no thanks here because we don't want to start a backfill yet. We go no thanks. So now Clearbit will only overwrite and populate these fields if it has values, if it has attribute values for both of these fields. The next thing we're going to take a look at are the selective enrichment criteria, which define which leads in your Marketo instance will be enriched by Clearbit. And this is important because you don't want to waste your enrichment credits enriching disqualified leads, or maybe you do not want to enrich free mail addresses. And as I note down here, while Clearbit can sometimes associate free mail addresses with the company that a person works for, it is quite a rare occurrence that Clearbit can map free mail addresses with companies. So that's up to you whether you want to spend credits enriching free mail addresses. But let's jump to the Clearbit platform now to show you how you can set up this kind of enrichment criteria logic. So the very first thing we have defined here is the lead status does not contain disqualified, and you can add other statuses here if you want. And then we're going to add a group here. So we're going to want this to be and, so lead status must not be disqualified, and let's say email address does not contain Gmail. You can add Yahoo, you can add anything you want here. And then we're going to add another condition, or if their lead source is paid search or advertising. And then we're going to make this or. So now the way the logic happens is the person must not be disqualified, and either their email address does not contain Gmail or Yahoo, or their lead source is paid advertising, or their lead source is paid search or advertising. So that's how we can define our selective enrichment criteria within Clearbit. So once we hit save here, we are then ready to enable live enrichment. And as I mentioned in the blog post here, once you enable lead enrichment, all the leads entering your Marketo database from this point onward that meet your enrichment criteria will be enriched, and any future updates for these leads will be pushed by Clearbit in batches to Marketo at regular intervals. However, if you want leads enriched immediately upon creation of Marketo, then you can see this section down below on how to create your Clearbit Marketo webhook, because if you want your leads to be enriched immediately, you need to send this webhook to let Clearbit know that there's a new person you want to be enriched. If you do not need your leads to be enriched immediately upon creation, then there is no need to send the webhook to Clearbit. Clearbit will identify and update any new leads in batches at regular intervals. And then once your Clearbit enrichment is up and running, you can use the enrichment logs tab to see anyone who's been enriched by your Clearbit instance. So in this case, I haven't started it yet, but what that looks like when it is up and running is you can see the people who've gone through it, and you can click into them to see what information Clearbit has found about them. Okay, now that we've turned on lead enrichment within Clearbit, you might be wondering, what about all the leads that are in my Marketo database that have not been enriched before I turned on lead enrichment? This is where we use the backfill enrichment option at the very bottom of the screen here. Because as I mentioned before, once you enable lead enrichment, it will only enrich and update leads that entered your database after lead enrichment was turned on. So if you want to backfill any people before this, then we need to use the backfill enrichment option. And once leads have been through the backfill enrichment, Clearbit will continue to update these leads as fresh data becomes available on them. And if you use the previous MarketoClearbit.com app, it was possible to upload a static list from Marketo to backfill. So you could only backfill and enrich people in that static list. Unfortunately, this is no longer an option in the new Clearbit platform. And the way you have to go about backfilling people is actually to use a new field, which you can call Clearbit Backfill. So the process, as I show you here in Marketo, is you define the smart list of people that you want to backfill. So the person was created in the past 30 days and their person source is paid search, for example. So you define the people you want to backfill in here. And then you turn the Clearbit backfill field to true. And then within your Clearbit platform, so I'm just going to show you an example here. I'm going to delete this. So let's say your existing criteria are an email address contains none of, let's just say Gmail. We need to modify these rules here so that adding the Clearbit backfilled field equals true condition does not interfere with our existing enrichment criteria. The reason for this is because, as I stated in the blog post here, these selective enrichment criteria govern both the live enrichment and the backfilling. So when we're adding this new Clearbit backfill field equal to true, we don't want to interfere with the selective enrichment criteria which govern our live enrichment as well. So we have to reformat things a bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these two quickly. I'm going to change this to Clearbit backfill is equal to true. And then I'm going to add a group. I'm going to make this OR, and then we're going to have the exact same criteria that we had before. Sorry, person status, or just status. Status is none of, and then same as before, let's put in disqualified, add condition, and email address is not equal to any of Gmail. So now we've got the exact same criteria that we had before, that the person status must not be disqualified and the email address does not contain Gmail. So that is unaffected. So people will be enriched if these criteria are true, or they will be enriched if Clearbit backfill is equal to true as well. So this is the way we modify our criteria that affect both our live enrichment and our backfill enrichment to ensure that our live enrichment is unaffected and we can still backfill the people we want based on the smart list we defined in Marketo, which is this smart list here. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can set up our webhook in Marketo. As I mentioned before, when you turn on live enrichment, any net new leads created in Marketo will be enriched by Clearbit at a regular schedule. However, if you don't want to wait for the scheduled enrichment and you want leads to be enriched immediately, then you need to send a webhook from Marketo to Clearbit to let it know there's a new lead you want to be enriched. So let's go to the settings tab of Clearbit to copy the webhook information we need. So I had to pause the video there quickly because I wanted to blur the webhook authorization header value here. So when you're in the Marketo section, if you go to settings, it will show you the webhook URL that you need. And it will also show you the authorization header value. You will need to copy both of those because we'll need them in Marketo later on when setting up our webhook. And we'll also note that the webhook request type is a GET and the response type should be none. So let's dive into Marketo now to see how to set all of this up. Okay, so with these values now, we're going to go over to the admin section in Marketo. We're going to go to webhooks. We're going to go to new webhook. Let's just call it Clearbit enrichment. You can put in an optional description. The URL is going to be this URL that you copy over from Clearbit. You're going to paste that in. So let me just copy that myself and paste that in. And then as we saw, it's going to be a GET request, and the response type is going to be none. So we leave that as is, and then we go create. So we're going to find that webhook that we just created, and then under webhook actions here, we're going to go set custom header, and we're going to add a new one. And Clearbit tells us that the webhook header should be called authorization, so we can just copy this. And then this value here is going to be this value that we copy from Clearbit. And then we paste that value in here. It'll look something like this. And then you hit save. And just a few notes that I've got noted before we continue. So you'll notice here that I've got all these steps listed out. And if you need a refresher on webhooks, or you want to see some other cool use, if you want to see some other cool use cases for webhooks Marketo, then take a look at this blog post here, the Marketo webhook guide with examples. Now that we've created this webhook, we can use it in the flows of our Marketo Smart campaigns to enrich people as they are created. And we can add filters to the smart list to define who will get sent to Clearbit immediately for enrichment. And the important note I wanted to point out is that although leads may qualify for this smart list, if they do not meet the selective enrichment criteria that you have defined within the Clearbit platform, if they do not meet these rules, then they will not be enriched by Clearbit. And similarly, leads who do not run through this Marketo Smart campaign or this Marketo flow may still be enriched at a later time if they pass the selective enrichment criteria that you have within the Clearbit platform. And the Marketo Smart campaign itself is very simple. All it is you define the audience here. So a person is created, their email address does not contain Gmail, the person status is not disqualified, and then all you do is you request that webhook that we just created in the admin section. And there you have it. That is everything you need to know about setting up your Clearbit Marketo integration. And now that you have this, you are ready to supercharge your lead scoring model. And there is no better time than to check out the Marketo lead scoring Bible here. I go through at least 3 different fit scoring mechanisms that score people based on their demographic and firmographic information. And I also go through some activity scoring models as well. So you should definitely check out this post to see how you can use all this Clearbit information to enhance your demographic and firmographic lead scoring within Marketo. And as always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments of the YouTube video. If you enjoy the content, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, then please subscribe. Have a great day.